Welcome to another episode of Cork Out History,
where we drink Portuguese wine.
and we talk about Portuguese history.
Mostly the wine.
My name is André,
And I'm Inês.
and welcome to Cork Out History.
Welcome to the second half of this conversation. If you would like to hear the first half, come visit me over at Past, and it'll be there. Now on to the second half. Yes.
So today we'll be talking about Philippa of Lancaster. Born in Leicester in 1360, Philippa would come to be the Queen of Portugal through her marriage with King John I, founding a new dynasty and one of the defining generations of Portugal's early modern history.
But today we are also joined by Veronica from Past Pod.
Hello.
Hi, Veronica.
Hi.
And just as Veronica mentioned before, if you want to find out how we got here, because this is actually the second episode in a part of two, so if you want to find out about Philippa's life earlier on, you will have to go on to the Past podcast, and we really recommend it. It's one of the ones that we follow every week.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
And since today we're establishing the connection between UK and Australia, it means it's 9 a.m. here in London, so today we won't be drinking any wine for once.
It's way too early, guys. Even for us.
It's 8 p.m. here now. No, sorry. 7 p.m. when we started. And I would fall asleep if I had a drink, so I'm not drinking either.
There we go. No one is drinking today. We'll just be going through the life of this spectacular woman.
Yeah.
So here we're going to be diving into the alliance between John of Portugal, who is John I of Portugal, and John of Gaunt. As we mentioned before, there's a lot of Johns in this story. And this alliance was only natural. They had a common enemy there's hardly a more solid reason to make a withstanding alliance. And the Treaty of Windsor was signed in 1386, allying England and Portugal. There was actually a treaty that had already been established before with the previous king, but the Treaty of Windsor comes into play now. Now, the Treaty of Windsor is kind of a big deal. It is considered to be the oldest alliance in history, which is still in force in politics today. Portugal and England, which would later be updated to be the United Kingdom, have never fought against each other, and they have never been on opposite sides of a war since this treaty. The only they haven't been in opposite sides of a war, with Portugal being an independent kingdom, because the only exception to the time that they fought in opposite sides is when Portugal lost its independence for 60 years. It's tragically true, to the Spanish king at the time. Yeah. And so we actually had to take part in the Spanish Armada fiasco.
Oh, ouch.
So, yeah. So we were with the Spanish at the time. Portugal wasn't independent. And actually the Spanish Armada departed from Lisbon.
Oh, yes.
In Portugal.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the only time since this Treaty of Windsor in 1386, the only time that they were in opposite sides of the war.
I find this treaty interesting that it's gone on for so long, because treaties always had to be re-signed when there was a new regnant, a new king or queen.
Yeah.
And it just continued for so long, which I think is a real lovely thing, actually.
Yeah, I think we have it quite present in our Portuguese mind. I'm not sure if the English are so aware of it as we are.
Yeah, definitely not.
I'm sure you helped box in Spain. Spain.
Yeah, exactly. I think we, as the smaller country, are a little bit more aware of it. Yeah. throughout history, this alliance has served both parties, even though they're not really that much aware of it. And it's not only relative to war. So war is part of it. So for instance, the UK became much more involved in the Peninsular War and in the Napoleonic Wars, thanks to this treaty. So they were on the side of Portugal, and that was one of the reasons or one of the excuses that they got so heavily involved in both the Napoleonic Wars and the Peninsular War. But also on the other side, there's an Anglo-American military base in Portugal, which, I mean, it has been a big deal, and also for the US, it's still a big deal, and when not so war, oh my god, so
and not only war but also commercially, is that what you're going at?
Yes.
Yeah. And commercially, yeah. I think it's been better for Portugal than actually in any other aspect, and still I'd say this with some doubts, because it meant that the competition was not as open as it could have been, so the prices were always tapped for England in a way that they were not for other countries. So really, this has worked for England more than anything else. Like it hasn't worked for Portugal as greatly as it has for England.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that's hard to say, really, because a lot of, if you look, I don't know, maybe especially at the north of Portugal, a lot of in terms of fabrics production, in terms of wine, that all shaped our country and the country we still have today, and a lot of it came from the market we did with England, the trades that we had with England.
True, but
and I do, obviously, there's all that you are saying. So there could have been more potential if we hadn't been just dealing with England. But I mean, I don't know. I think it did shape us to be what we are today.
Yeah, but just not to sugarcoat it, let's not forget that this treaty didn't stop England from making an ultimatum to Portugal in the 19th century. Yeah. So that's a whole other story.
What?
Yeah.
Also, England needs very little excuse to be colonialist.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Yeah, exactly. It's we called it the pink ultimatum because in the in the maps it was done in pink, and you're right, it had to do with colonial Africa.
Yeah.
And we still
is.
hold resentment over that.
And separation of territories in Africa, and
it was not nice in any way.
No. And this was all leading to World War One, and but I mean, it is what it is.
Let's not draw
but it started here,
arbitrarily.
But it all started here. So, and I mean, to this day, I'm not sure how to what extent everything is. How impactful it is, but yes, traditionally it's the oldest alliance still
standing,
in force today.
Wow.
Yeah, still standing. And it all started here. And to cement this alliance, we had to have a wedding.
Yay!
And that's why we're talking about this.
Yeah. So this marriage between Philippa and John was convenient for both parties, as we said, and King John I of Portugal, he did not come to the crown by natural order or by peaceful means. No, not at all. So let's just look at that really quickly. He was an illegitimate son of King Peter I of Portugal. His legitimate half-brother Fernando became king in his own time, but he would die early at the age of 38 without a male heir. He had a daughter, Beatrice, who was married to King John of Castile. That King John, yes. The one of the other Johns, the John of Gaunt and John of Portugal.
That we mentioned in the previous episode. I just realized we didn't quite mention him in this episode. It was in the previous episode.
Go
on
listen.
The passport.
Yeah,
go there.
Listen.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Now, if they would accept Beatrice as the heir in practical terms, this would mean that Portugal would lose its independence to Castile. So, despite being illegitimate, John of Portugal, who was master of the order of Avish, so he was in a monastic order, and that's where the chastity vows go. He would seize this chance to grab the Portuguese throne, and it's a whole story that we will leave for another episode. But all that matters right now for this one is that he seized the throne, and it started a succession crisis, which lasted 2 years of war between Portugal and Castile. English help was therefore a very valuable commodity for securing this new throne, in battles such as the Battle of Aljubarrota. And yes, that's also for another episode.
I am so glad you said that and not me.
That's not an easy one.
Aljubarrota. Yeah, Aljubarrota is one of our biggest battles. And I mean, I know that we were saying maybe, England has profited more from this Windsor Treaty than Portugal has. But I mean, they did lend a helping hand in Aljubarrota. And I mean, if we had lost that battle, instead of, spoilers, winning it, things would have been completely different, because I mean, we could be Spanish right now, and I prefer the way things went.
It would be very different.
It would be very different. So I mean, I don't know.
You'd have a king.
We can't tell how. Yes, that for one. Yeah, exactly. We would have a king.
Good choice not having one.
Yeah. So I don't know, but at least that they did help in Aljubarrota. So that's something that we got from the Treaty of Windsor. Now, Andre just mentioned a little bit of something that we heavily hinted in the last episode, and we promised we would explain why this King John had made chastity vows, which didn't allow him to get married. I mean, this seems very counterintuitive for someone who's going to be king, right? I mean, you do have to get married and have children. That's how monarchy works, apparently.
It's your one job. Like, keep your country safe in battle and have some babies.
Ideally, and yeah. And so, yeah, we've finally come to that. So the way, just as Andre was mentioning, the reason that he had made chastity vows is because, well, John I was not meant to be king from the start. He was an illegitimate son of the previous king. And as, often happens with illegitimate sons or with second sons, he had joined a religious order. So he was actually, the way that Andre mentioned, he was the master of the order of Avish. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I guess we'll just go with Avish.
And of course, as an illegitimate son of the king, he was not just one member of the order. He was the most important member of that order. Yeah,
the big one.
Yeah.
Some illegitimate sons win. That's how they win.
Yeah,
You just
exactly.
give them offices that they can help influence politics and whatnot.
Yeah.
Church politics even.
Yeah, just so. So he was, big one in the order of Avish, and that came, obviously, being a religious order, that came with the chastity vow. He was not meant to have a family. So when things change and suddenly he's like, oh, we don't want to be Spanish, I'll take this throne, we have a little bit of a conundrum here, because, well, vows had been made, and yet now he needed children. And so, yes, he needs to appeal to get a papal, a pope dispensation.
Papal dispensation
and
in English. I know it's different in Portuguese.
Yeah, that was
papal dispensation. I love it.
Yeah.
It's a fun phrase.
And he had to go for it, and I mean, it did. It it did take a while. Just like we mentioned, it did take a while. I mean, I guess everything did take a little while in the 14th century. Apparently, this took a little bit longer. I read that the Pope was, well, this is the Pope that was in Rome. At the time, we had two popes, right?
Yes.
We had one Pope in Avignon, and we had a Pope in Rome. And the Pope in Rome was, let's say, more aligned with the English side of things, whereas the Pope of Avignon was more aligned with the French side of things. And so the Pope in Rome he didn't want to go against England per se, and he hadn't quite fully understood that this because he knew that John of Gaunt was trying to get the throne of Castile, and he knew that accepting John I as king, he might have a claim to the throne of Castile as well. So he was like, oh, let's delay that slightly. I don't know if that's gonna go against, John of Gaunt. And then he had to be informed that it's like, no, John of Gaunt actually really needs this dispensation. Please, he wants to marry his daughter to this king. Everything is getting delayed. And then it's like, oh, why didn't you say so? Here it is. Go ahead. And finally, so that was the reason for the delay. But it did arrive in time. The wedding could go forth.
Sorry, I was going to say the Pope actually... had issued a papal bull to support John of Gaunt's claims to the Castilian throne. And that was part of what caused him to even take the chance to go there.
Exactly.
Is how all of this happened. He's a big Gaunt supporter.
Yeah, exactly. And he didn't want to, step onto anyone's toes by giving this one, and then he realized, oh no, they're on the same side. Oh my bad, here it is. Go ahead, get married by all means. And so the wedding could finally go forth, and at this time everything had already been a little bit delayed, and with war there's timings, and the war had now to move swiftly, and in order to get the war moving, they wanted to get the wedding out of the way. In the way that they had to get the wedding out of the way. There had been, when they agreed on the wedding, they had done a wedding by proxy according, like we mentioned in the previous episode. There are no Portuguese sources to this wedding by proxy. There's only English sources to this wedding by proxy, but it seems that a wedding by proxy might have happened when they were first, initializing the contract. So, like we mentioned, to find more about that wedding by proxy, go on to the previous episode and listen to the previous episode on Past Pod. But now it's time for the, let's say, real wedding. So this wedding had been delayed. They needed to rush things a little bit. And things were definitely a little bit rushed. So the king, first, a medieval wedding is slightly different to, it's very different to weddings today. So might come as a shock.
A truer thing has never been said.
This wedding would actually be sort of comprised of 3 parts. So on the 2nd of this was February. Anyway,
February.
I think it's February. Yeah.
The proxy occurred on the 14th. Yeah, sorry. Yes, the 2nd of February.
Yeah. So the first step is to have the wedding blessed, and that happened on the 2nd of February, and then you have the let's say the big party, and that happened on the 14th, and then you'll have the consummation of the wedding with the bedding, right? It's all in different stages. So we can say actually the wedding started on the 2nd and would finish on the 14th. So on the second, there's only the blessing ceremony, and then the king, and that didn't have many people at all. The king had been traveling the country. He didn't seem to be overly concerned with having to have a wedding until someone was like, well, it's going to be... How do you say Quaresma, André?
Lent.
Lent? Lent period is about to start, and you can't have
a wedding there.
A wedding then. So Lent period is actually quite long, which would delay things incredibly. So suddenly the king is like, oh, all right, okay, let's, rush up there. Let's get this started. And he sends, let's say, the invitations, and, medieval world is not like today. So people were sent invitations, and suddenly the wedding was in 12 days. So a lot of people couldn't make it. But yeah, because suddenly it was... seems like he wasn't a great planner.
I feel like it's a Monty Python sketch, actually. Like, getting this wedding. We've got the blessing, and then we've got the
we had the proxy as well,
with the bedding,
and then this.
Get your act together, guys.
So I mean, a lot of the country couldn't make it to Porto. Porto is a city in the north of the country, and it's the second largest city in Portugal after the capital. So a lot of people couldn't, make it there. But from what we can see, it didn't really take away from the festivities on the 14th. So Porto is already a big city. Everyone who could attend was there. And you have everything that you have in a medieval, or that we can imagine there was in a medieval wedding. So you have, the tournaments, jousting, parties, you had banquets, decorated streets, you name it. There was everything. And the festivities through Portugal, in the rest of it, in the little towns and cities, it would last for 15 days after that. Everyone, partying and drinking on behalf of this new English lady coming to Portugal.
I am down for that party. That sounds good.
Yeah, we all are. I think
sounds great, isn't it?
Usually we don't want to be part of what happens in this podcast because it's either war or blackfed or something. But this part we would. Yeah.
Awesome.
So Philippa and King John spent the first periods of their marriage apart, actually, because there was a war going on and there was a lot to deal with. However, Philippa's father, John of Gaunt, would eventually give up on his ambitions to hold the throne of Castile himself, and decided instead that a diplomatic solution of engaging his daughter Catherine to the heir of the throne might work better and save some lives.
Thank goodness he brought those daughters with him.
Yeah,
exactly.
Good asset too. Yeah,
that was good planning for once.
Exactly.
It's like, let's just... They'll come in handy, probably.
They're worth a lot, apparently, on the marriage market. So.
And this means that 3 of his children actually became kings and queens. So his son Henry would be the 4th of his name and hold the crown of England. Catherine, Philippa's half-sister, would get the crown of Castile, and Philippa actually gets the crown of Portugal. So yeah,
he did quite well for himself, didn't he?
That's quite the
I want to say 4 of his grandchildren were actually kings or queens as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So it carries on.
Yeah.
Oh no, it gets even more scary. Don't look at that family tree.
Yes. But so clearly he gave up on his ambitions for himself and completely focused them on his children.
Yeah, and Philippa actually kept close relationships with her family. Her father and Constance came to visit her a few times before returning to England, and after that they kept on corresponding.
Yeah, it's a little bit... It's nice, isn't it, to see things that we can find a little bit relatable to our own lives, and to see, even a queen in the 13th century, we might be tempted to think of them as something other than almost human or a person just like we are. But I find it very relatable to see the kind of relationships that they kept with their family.
And reading letters from this kind of correspondence, I haven't read any by Philippa, but anyway, this kind of royal correspondence, it always kind of gives you that sense of normality and like relatable,
a little bit heartwarming.
Yeah.
So I found, it's not the cutest thing, obviously, but it's quite cute. John of God actually left her a few things in his will. So I have two of his biographies, which both have his will in it. And she was left specifically his second best gold drinking horn and a goblet covered with gold.
Okay.
So there we go.
Who was left his first?
I
best,
didn't actually read the whole will. I was like, let's find out what Philippa got. Oh, cool. So I just think it's sweet that even though he knew she'd be well cared for because her husband was a king and wealthy, and she'd had children by him at this point, so she was very secure.
Yeah.
He still felt the need to leave her just something small as a memory of him. Yeah, and I think that's really lovely.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that, just make us look at these as people who might have lived all that time ago and have really different experiences to our own, no doubt, but still some of the experiences are, relatable.
Exactly.
So, in her new kingdom, Philippa dedicated herself to fitting in. She was really big in supporting the king in person whenever possible. She made a true effort to learn the language and the culture. But we can say that she did not try. I mean, she did not try to fit into in detriment of herself. So she did really try to become a part of this new court, and she also brought a lot of herself into the new court. So she introduced a lot of new anglicized traditions and ways of doing things. And
I'm probably going to think these things sound like completely normal traditions when you tell me what they are. So I'm really looking forward to this, actually, because I'm like, that's totally how English-speaking people do it, and it will be something that is completely new in Portugal at that time.
Yeah, we are going to look a little bit into her legacy to the Portuguese court in just a little bit. But, okay. Despite her late marriage, so remember that Philippa was 27, God forbid, by the time that all these weddings, that finally this wedding had gone through. Philippa would prove to be extremely successful in her royal reproduction duties.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, she had a lot of babies. And I mean, what babies? She had amazing children. Her children will be known as the illustrious generation in Portugal. We call it a ínclita geração. So the illustrious generation. And they all distinguish themselves in some way. Also, I mean, there's also propaganda and privilege, let's not forget that, but I mean, that's part of it, right? Maybe some of them were not that amazing, but they were, because they were part of the illustrious generation, so they had everything going for them. However...
Still, they could just lay in the sun and do nothing. But they did
I want
something.
that job.
Exactly. Yeah. That's probably what I would go for. Yeah. But they did do something else with their lives. So, props to them. That's a good way to look at it. So she was very successful in this role. However, it is worth noting that this prole started with a miscarriage. And after she went on to have 8 children.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's a lot of births.
I'll be honest, I'll share this with your listeners. I have 3 children, and that's a lot of kids. 8 is just an unimaginable number of children in my mind.
Yes, it's really quite daunting. So, and she started at 27. Well, and she got married at 27, so all her children came after that. First she had a miscarriage, and then her last child she would have at the age of 42, which, I mean, today is still considered to be a risk pregnancy. So,
oh yes,
I mean, imagine in the 14th century. I mean, in the 14th century, all of them were risk pregnancies, but at 42, it's there's quite a little bit more into that one.
Yeah, so she had first a girl called Branca after Philippa's mother Blanche. That's basically the Portuguese for Blanche, I guess.
Yes, yes.
So, but this baby would not survive her first year, and the next one was a boy, which was very welcomed. There was now an heir to the throne, and they named him Afonso, a kingly name in Portugal. We have many kings that go by Afonso.
Yeah, we do.
I'm surprised he wasn't named John, just to make it more difficult
Yeah.
for us.
We'll get there.
Good for us, good for us.
There's 8 children.
Yeah.
Safe.
Yeah. Then we had Duarte, named after the Edwards in Philippa's family, so there's always a connection here. Edward III and Edward the Black Prince. And then came Pedro, named after King Peter I, John's father, and lastly Henrique, this time after Henry, Philippa's brother and great-grandfather. After all of these boys, then came a girl called Isabel, inspired by both sides of the family, as there was Isabel or Elizabeth on both sides, so an homage to everyone. Oh, there's another one? Oh, shit.
There's 8 of them, Andre.
Yes.
I know.
There's another one.
Children.
I thought I had said 8, but yeah. Lastly,
I was
then.
writing it.
Yeah, so
It was.
lastly, we finally get to John, João.
Yay!
Yeah.
We had to get there.
So we
Now,
had
how do
one
you
as
say
well.
John in Portuguese?
João.
João.
I'm not going to say that right.
No,
It's a tough one. It's a tough one.
Jua.
It's yeah.
João.
João.
Yeah, no, I don't possess that vowel sound.
No, yeah, I know. It's very tricky for any English speaking person to.
In my
For
defense,
anyone,
I
really.
do speak languages that aren't English. They just aren't the ones that you two speak. So
Yeah,
I'm not one of
yeah,
those
yeah,
monolingual Americans.
Right.
But it's a it's a sound. It's a tricky sound
Yes.
to yeah.
I'm sure I'd
to
get used to
reproduce,
it quickly if I
for sure.
practiced it.
Yeah.
You could with all the
And-
Joões that are around. Like, there's enough practice here. But yeah.
And it's funny because it's like even today still one of the most common names in Portugal.
Oh,
And
wow.
when there's always bound to be some, English speaking person trying to say the names, and it's always butchered, and it's always hilarious for us. But
You can leave my butchering
so-
in if you want, just so that your listeners, your Portuguese listeners can have a laugh. It's okay. It's how we learn. We mispronounce things to learn, right?
It is.
No, yeah, exactly,
Totally.
exactly. And we mispronounce a lot of English
I
words.
wouldn't have
Yeah,
learned
yeah,
other
yeah.
languages if I hadn't mispronounced things. So
Exactly. If
Exactly.
we are afraid of mispronouncing, no, for sure. But João is. We did get there, and there's a João in her 8 children as well. Had to be. So Afonso, who was the heir, he would pass away sadly when he was 10 years old, and so the responsibility of the crown passed to his brother Duarte, and oh my God, there's still another child.
did we miss one?
No, it comes after this. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, she had
Yeah,
another
'cause
one after.
Yeah,
Oh,
after this, yeah.
She
okay.
is a star. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, she is, yeah. So after Afonso dies, Duarte gets the crown responsibilities, and then Philippa has her last son, who was named Fernando, after his uncle. So that's King John's King John's legitimate brother, from whose daughter he usurped the throne. This last pregnancy was very difficult. It was, the one she had when she was 42, and it seriously threatened Philippa's life. In such cases, when the life of the mother was in jeopardy, abortion would be considered, and it is said that the king himself offered her the abortive mixture, which Philippa refused in light of her religious beliefs. Yeah. I mean, it is important to notice that when the sources refer to this, there is a laudatory tone on these accounts, if not even moralizing.
Yes.
They do appreciate that she refused it for her religious beliefs and that she decided to go forth in despite of herself. But in any case, both mother and child would survive this grueling experience.
Yay! It is, but it's true. Even today, I'm older and had my twins at an older age, and it's still complicated pregnancies still exist today, and it's a very difficult thing to think about while you're pregnant. Like you want your little babies, and so it's I imagine it wouldn't be dissimilar. I think people think the same way we do back then. Scary but difficult.
So she in any case, she did refuse, and this time I'm happy to say it worked out. So yay. I read that Philippa was really big into, like we mentioned before as well, but into reading, for instance. Apparently her mom was really instrumental in her love for literature, and she did pass that on to her sons, clearly. Also, I did read this interesting note that the first English book to be translated into Portugal would be not into Portugal,
into Portuguese.
Into Portuguese, or to be read in Portugal, would be thanks to Philippa. So she would have some of the books of the English books translated into Portuguese.
Yeah, and also one of her sons, so Duarte, the one that we mentioned that will be king. He is one of the kings that became also famous for writing. So he does write a lot of poetry, and he writes a book called Leal Conselheiro, which would be translated to something like the loyal counselor, the lawyer, something like that. It's
advisor.
A series of rules. It's a series of rules on how to behave, basically. So he was really into poetry and philosophy. So
we have a lot of his poetry, which is
wow.
I remember
that would be beautiful.
seeing about that. And this is not all that Philippa had an impact on in Portugal. Like we mentioned before, she started to change the customs at court. And out of the many ways that she impacted them, one of the most significant changes was developing and cementing the power and the influence of the House of the Queen. And we can see this in several different ways. For instance, the Queen has lands that belong to her and from which her independence is assured. And I mean, this had already been the case before. This was already ongoing. However, Philippa steps into her responsibilities and takes it a lot further than any queen had ever done before. So she is really hands-on, properly administrating these lands. Other than that, there is also, I'm not sure if this is the word they use in English for this kind of thing, but there is the gineceu of the queen. So
no,
I'm not.
How do you spell it?
In Portugal, we call it. In Portuguese, it would be Gineceu.
Yeah.
In English, I think This is related to flowers, right? To botany, I think.
It's gynoeceum, yeah.
Gynoeceum. Okay. So anyway,
like gynecology.
I will explain what this is.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose it comes
the same
from the same
origin. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Has something to do with ladies.
Lady parts.
I think it's also based in
Yeah.
I think it's also based in botany, like something to do with flora. No, I think so.
To know which one
Anyway.
came first, if from the flower to the ladies or the ladies to the flowers. I don't know what's the connection.
You would
anyway.
need to study the Greek and Roman philosophers.
Yes,
and
exactly.
They are,
Exactly.
they are a shockingly
for sure.
sexist bunch. So I don't
Yeah.
recommend it.
They are, yeah. So, yes, another way that she impacts is there is this gynoeceum or whatever you call it. This is basically a group of ladies around the queen. This whole circle revolves around the queen. So she's the epicenter of this game. She's the epicenter of this game of influence, to the point where she's the one making and arranging the marriages of these noble ladies.
Okay.
Now, so now let's not forget that a marriage is an alliance. So there is an immense power in this role. It's a little bit different. It's, we can say, a feminine kind of power, but it's still a lot of power in this role. As she is surrounded by all the noble ladies of the family, she's educating them, she's getting them ready to marriage, getting ready for marriage, and then she's actually arranging these marriages. And relating to this, it's also worth mentioning that until then, things were a little bit different. So it was customary for the king to decide on these marriages himself, and he would just notify the bride and the groom the night before. So just the night before, he would order them, like, get ready, you are getting married tomorrow, and he wouldn't even notify them whom to. So to whom? So so imagine getting that notice, okay, getting ready tomorrow, and people would only find out who they actually were getting married to the next day. And I mean, that was that. And Philippa actually changed this a little bit. So obviously marriages would still be arranged, but now the family of the bride and supposedly the bride herself, so they had to approve and consent to the marriage before. So it wasn't just, here, there you go get married, make babies, these houses are now allied. Like, it would be a more, we can say more modern to our sensibilities way to do things.
It does sound similar in England, how they'd have a betrothal process at first. So, and you'd hopefully at least get to know your spouse before you married them. Philippa's uncle Lionel actually lived with his spouse because they were betrothed when they were very young. And her father had died when she was a baby. And so she was raised in his household with him even. So they got to know each other probably a little in an odd sibling way before they got married. I think something in between those two extremes is the right answer.
Exactly. Yeah. Probably right on that one. But so she did bring something. I mean, in any way, something definitely good to this process.
Yeah, and the scene internationally had also changed. So Portugal and Castile were now in peace, and so Portugal could think of other things and could turn its sights away from their neighbor and look elsewhere. And that would also be a form of asserting Portuguese power, to find somewhere else to turn their attention to. And that happened to Ceuta in Morocco. Portugal was going through some economic problems, and Ceuta seemed to be the solution for all of it. Not only solving those problems, but also offering a very appealing notion of fighting against the infidels, so against the Moorish people that lived in Morocco. There were riches to be taken while delivering that idea of religious crusade that fueled everyone. So it made this war not only justifiable but also commendable in their minds, and it got the interest of nobility and the princes themselves.
I think Sorry, can I? No. I think, obviously, Christians fighting Christians never stopped any war, right? Like,
No.
we have that, and we're going to keep having that, and we are well familiar with that. However, when they found this themselves, like, oh, Portugal, the only land border they have, so is Spain. So, but here is no Spain. Okay, cut that. Once Portugal had peace with Castile, okay, they didn't really have any more ongoing wars with the Christians, and suddenly there's all this, now we want to go there, and this is actually, we should actually go there, because it's more...
It's the next closest thing where that can happen. Like, you have the sea, you have Castile and the other Spanish kingdoms, and then you just have the south where you've expelled the Moorish populations to before. So let's go after them. And so the king wasn't too keen on this, and he resisted the prince's enthusiasm. However, it appears that Philippa, the queen, persuaded him otherwise. She did not want the king to go. His fighting years were behind him, but she gave support to her boy's desire for battle. And she became a very big supporter of this venture and was paramount in convincing the king to attempt to take the city, although she couldn't stop himself from going. So plans didn't go exactly as she wanted. But, well, he was going, so apparently she was involved in the preparations, and as it's also always highlighted how Philippa was very religious, so this was also part of her increased intensity of fasting and praying that she took to ensure that they would have a safe journey and come back. Yeah.
Yeah, that was part of the preparations, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's interesting to see, like, religion was such a big part of their world. It's different to the importance religion has today. And I mean, as much as obviously there's all the practical plans going on, but praying and fasting, and that was actually considered to be part of the planning, of the heavy planning as well. It was crucial to ensure that things would go as well as possible. And she really threw herself into this, and she was fasting loads. And I mean, okay, that's great, but it's probably not gonna make you any stronger. And it weakened her a little bit. Like, it's a lot of vigils and fasting and praying. So here we come again. At this time, the plague, so the Black Death, was rife all through Europe, and such was the case in Portugal as well. And it reached even, that's the thing about plague, it doesn't care, it reached even the king's court. So the king left ahead to go to, the king left ahead to go into isolation in the convent of Odivelas. And yes, listeners, if you listen to our last episode, that's the same one. So in our last episode, we see someone living in this convent later on. This is the same convent, only a few centuries before. So he removed himself to the convent, but the queen delayed her departure a little bit. Apparently still having to do with the religious aspects of it and all the praying and vigils and stuff. And there you go. Perhaps her body was weakened by the long periods of fasting. And I mean, perhaps it would have happened either way. Who can know, right? All we know is that by the time that they moved her to the convent where her husband was, it was far too late. So the queen had already contracted the plague. Before dying, we are coming to this sad end. So before dying, the queen wanted to knight her sons, and she ordered them. Wanted to knight her son, and the swords that had been ordered for them to take into the conquest of Ceuta, they were not finished yet. So again, everything is a little bit delayed. And so but death doesn't wait, right? So she decided to initiate them into the Order of Christ. This is a big order, religious order in Portugal, and it's comes after the Knights of Templar. And she decided to initiate them into the Order of Christ with a wooden cross that was then broken in pieces for each of them to keep as a token. Yeah. Then on the next day, she was finally able to give the swords, because apparently they weren't that late and she wasn't dead yet. So the next day, she actually, had the swords blessed and gave them the swords, and the speeches were made very much in line with all the chivalry notions, and she reminded them to be loyal to each other and gave each of them a little task for their oncoming lives.
Yeah, and maybe we downplayed it a bit when we just said that they were going to Ceuta, but this actually marks the beginning of what would be the Portuguese expansion overseas, and it's a world that's just about to change dramatically. So it's a big moment, despite all the considerations we might do when looking at that. But it is a big thing, and the Queen did not leave to see them go on this venture, and she never got to know its successful outcome. Duarte, the heir to the throne, refused to leave his mother's side, and stayed with her until she passed, actually. And years later, he would also be taken by the same Black Death.
Yeah, it really is the beginning of the Portuguese sea expansion through the sea. Sea expansion?
Portuguese expansion.
Maritime.
The Portuguese
overseas
expansion.
Yeah, of the overseas expansion. There you go.
There was no
Brilliant.
to expand anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's that moment that Portugal, it's in the corner of Europe, and suddenly the ones they had been fighting, what had been keeping their attention, was Castile, and other than that, there wasn't much. Like we have the sea on two borders, and so after that is sorted, you need to step out of the country, and that's going to shape the Portuguese history for the next, well, until today, but for the next centuries to come. And it's going to be not only the Portuguese history, actually, it's going to shape the world's history in the next centuries to come. So yes, this moment was a really, really big moment in not only Portuguese history but also world's history, and Philippa seems to have been instrumental to to convince the king to take that step. So I don't think we can downplay this in any way. And when we analyze the legacy of Philippa, we cannot ignore that her figure was molded to fit an idea in Portuguese history. So she was depicted as the perfect Christian family-orientated queen, who had an amazing batch of boys who inaugurated the golden age of the discoveries. And this vision of her started during her dynasty. So there was a lot of propaganda coming during the dynasty, started with her and then going forward. So it starts there, which, it's perfectly normal. It's the kings that are ruling the country, so that's to be expected. But this vision also would perpetuate until today, even. So we don't want to deny her, righteous glory of being a mother. She was amazing at that, and she excelled on those accounts. She excelled on that role by all accounts. However, we want to complete, we just want to complete that portrait of her. So we want to go beyond that one-dimensional notion and recognize her as a multifaceted human being.
I was going to say really quickly, I think it's interesting how women need to fit into this script, even to this day, but more so in that time period. So she's celebrated for being this perfect mother and raising, as you called it, a brood of sons. That was a great word. this group of sons who are seen as obviously illustrious and the perfect men as they should be seen.
Yeah.
And I think it's always fascinating. If she had stepped out of that box too far, she would be perceived completely differently by history, because her great-grandmother did step out of that box, and Isabella of France is regularly derided for her willingness to step up and protect what she saw as her rights. So Philippa found a way to do it, to get the best out of the situation without stepping on any toes. And it sounds like she was quite influential in her own right. So I think that's quite interesting.
Most definitely. And I think, just for instance, Andre, if you go today to Lisbon, there's a modern monument, not an old one, but a modern monument made to the discoveries. It overlooks the Tagus River, and it's a monument to the discoveries kind of thing. And it's full with all the characters that, were prevalent in the Portuguese history, and Philippa is the only woman being represented there. And she is represented there because she was this perfect mother to these golden children who will do the Age of Discoveries.
Yeah. And this, just to give some context, that monument was built in the 40s by the fascist dictatorship in Portugal. So, of course, it had to... There is a woman there, but she had to follow a very tight script, and she had to fit into a box. And even with the men in this family, and even whenever we talk about whoever we talk about, they always have to fit in a particular box, whatever that box is. And what's interesting is to get a little bit out of that and see things like what Inês mentioned about the House of the Queen, or the influence that she had in literature and her children, which goes beyond just that role that we usually put her in. But it's still major that she's on that monument, and that she's really celebrated in Portuguese history anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing. It's great, It's amazing that she really stood out as a mother, and I'm sure her children were her life. But even to a life as like having 8 children.
Oh my God!
Let's look into. There's still more to it.
As a stay-at-home mom of 3, there's a lot more to life.
There is more to it, right? Yeah.
So,
and we just wanted to take the time to have a look into what else made Philippa. Who else was Philippa of Lancaster?
Yeah, and thank you, Veronica, for joining us today. It was great having you here and being on your podcast as well. So
thank you so much for having me.
Now go listen to the first part if you haven't.
Yes, please.
You really should. I think both episodes give you a view of a little bit like the relationship and influence of Portugal and England at the time and the United Kingdom today. So go check out the previous episode and find out how we got to this one.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
See you next time.
And this is where I'll stop for now. Join us on the next episode.
Until then, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Cork Out History Pod, where you can reach out to us, let us know your thoughts, and discover more about the episodes.
Don't forget to rate and subscribe wherever you're listening to us.
Your comments really are crucial so that more people can find us.
Bye.